I'm Edward Lucas and I worry about Russia and China for a living. I write newspaper articles, I work at a think tank, I've written books, I give advice and sometimes people pay me. And I am trying to explain to people in the advanced industrialized democracies, the so-called West, the shape of the threat that we face and how much of this is our own fault, and that the solution to this largely lies in our own hands. Modern Russia is a really strange place because on the surface it can look quite normal. You have businesses, quite successful businesses, you have courts, you have elections, you have politicians, you have reasonably diverse media on many things. And yet, actually, this is mostly a sham. And behind the scenes, it's run by a gang of ex-KGB people and their business and political pals. And to keep the machine working, they need a sense of external threat. And so the machine feeds on conflict, if necessary, manufactured conflict. And that makes Russia a very difficult neighbour for us and a source of instability for Europe and for the world. In the closing years of the Cold War, the general consensus in the Soviet Union was that communism didn't work and capitalism would work, and that one-party rule didn't work and democracy was better, and that the rule of law was good for everybody. And so we saw quite a striking, if superficial, convergence. And we had multi-party elections, liberalised economy, lots of things that were greeted in the West as very, very positive signs. And that's largely ebbed now, and the consensus inside Russia is that Western-style democracy doesn't work, Western economies are wildly overrated, and that Russia is going to pursue its own path, and that will be better for Russia and might even be better for everybody else. Democracy is in retreat. There's no doubt about that. Whichever way you measure it, there are fewer democracies, and in the countries that are democracies, the democratic system is in trouble. We see alienation among the voters. They don't believe in it, they don't like it. We see countries saying other things work better, we prefer the Chinese model, you get richer faster, it's more stable, we think for the long term and so on. So we've got a serious problem, and I think largely this is our fault. Nobody made us make the mistakes we made in the 1990s. Nobody forced us to have disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Nobody forced us to have a financial system that goes bust at regular intervals, impoverishing people who are not to blame and enriching the people who were. Nobody forced us to mismanage the COVID pandemic. We did all these things to ourselves because we're complacent and lazy and greedy and maybe even unlucky. But we now live with the consequences, and one of those consequences is that democracy is in retreat and our reputation's in tatters. We inherited an incredible legacy in 1990 that most of the world reckoned that our system was the best, that welfare, capitalism, liberal democracy had triumphed and communism and autocracy had failed. And it was really just a matter of time until everyone in the world would have the same broadly similar approach of multi-party democracy, the rule of law, and a fairly free market economy. And we threw that away. I still believe in those principles, but we have almost systematically discredited them by the way we've behaved. We've been selfish, we've been complacent, we've been reckless. The biggest threat is dirty money, because dirty money affects our decision-making, which then makes it harder for us to deal with all the other problems that we've got. Those problems include the difficulties in our information space, the rise of new media and rumours and hoaxes and scare stories, which we've seen particularly with over the pandemic, but before that with other sort of conspiracy theories and so on. And so that's a problem. There's the alienation of large slices of the population who don't think that democracy works for them and are vulnerable to these sort of new forms of misinformation and disinformation. There's the persistent question of inequality, which to some extent stokes all these other things. People feel they don't have an economic stake in the system. The perception that the system is corrupt is the basis for alienation from the system. And even if it's not corrupt, if people think it is, then they're already less likely to trust it. And trust is the glue that makes our system work. And dirty money is corrosive of trust. I've been arguing that we need to measure social trust as an indicator of national security. It matters more than aircraft carriers or tanks or bombers, because once that goes, the system and the country become almost indefensible. Ever since the printing press was invented, there's always been a tension between technology and the normative and legal framework, and there's always catch-up. First we invent things, then we work out how to behave decently and how we need to control them. And it's just the same with the internet, which has only been around in its current form for 10 or 20 years. We now have a possibility to have a machine in your pocket which has all the knowledge in the world and can communicate free of charge with everyone in the world. And obviously that brings challenges, but I'm quite optimistic we will work out the framework we need for making this a positive rather than negative thing. But we also need to realise that our enemies can use this against us, and indeed they do. It always takes time for social norms and for regulation to evolve. And we're playing catch-up with probably the most rapid technological change we've had in history, with the growth of the internet, where everybody in the world can reach pretty much anyone else in the world free of charge and instantly. And you can run a global disinformation campaign from a thing in your pocket that costs you $50. I think the old distinctions between left and right, which used to characterise the political spectrum, are breaking down. We see civil wars on the left on issues such as feminism, trans rights, the relation between individual freedom and religious particularism, very sharp questions there. And we also see huge divisions on the right, as we've seen in the United States, particularly between the sort of the never-Trumpers and the Trumpistas. So I think the old left-right distinctions are increasingly irrelevant. But we have yet to decide what the new political spectrum is, and it probably won't just be a one-dimensional spectrum going from on one axis. It's probably multidimensional, and perhaps future generations will understand it better than we do at the moment. I think we need a stronger normative framework for the news and for people in journalism more than we need more regulation. The problem with regulation is people game it, and they find some tiny loophole in the rules that allows them to do the bad thing that they want to do. And so I'm strongly in favour of having a good journalistic culture where you do the right thing because you want your colleagues to admire you, and you don't do the wrong thing because you don't want your colleagues to despise you. And that's far more powerful than having any kind of media regulator. And I think that we need to create that normative framework through better training and also better networking and creating a kind of civil society within journalism that supports people who do the right thing and punishes people who do the wrong thing. I think New Debate fills a gap in the market for an information product which is driven by real concern for the future of our democracy, but is not impossibly high-minded, that you can actually watch and it'll be interesting and entertaining. And the combination of the people behind New Debate and the ideas that drive them and the obvious gap in the market is really attractive to me. We need to understand that we're under attack, that there are countries, particularly Russia and China, who are trying to do us harm, and that they're succeeding in this not so much because they're powerful, but because we are weak and complacent and divided and disorganized. And if New Debate can alert us to the shape of the threat, to the way in which we enable the threat through our own weaknesses and show us ways in which we can counter it, I think that will be doing a really important work.